My name is Elias Thorne. For most of my 34 years, I've found a quiet purpose in the language of old things. I'm an architectural historian, a preservationist based in Boston, a city that wears its history like a well-loved coat. My work is a slow, methodical conversation with the past, tracing the lines of a forgotten cornice, deciphering the story told by the sag of a century-old floorboard, or understanding the soul of a building through its bones. I live a life that, to an outsider, appears modest. I drive a 10-year-old sedan, live in a simple but light-filled apartment in Somerville, and prefer the quiet company of books to the clamor of social scenes. I've always believed that the most profound value lies not in what is seen, but in what is understood, not in what is owned, but in what is preserved. It's a philosophy that has guided my work, my life, and my quiet, long-held secret. The annual Hawthorne family dinner was, as always, a masterclass in competitive materialism. It was held at the Willows, an old-world restaurant overlooking the Charles River, a place with white tablecloths so starched they could stand on their own, and waiters who moved with the silent, judgmental grace of pallbearers. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and quiet desperation. My uncles, Robert and Charles, were already deep in a discussion about their golf handicaps and stock portfolios. My Aunt Beatrice was subtly angling her new Hermes handbag into the light, a silent beacon of her husband's latest bonus. And my cousins, well, they were the main event. Elias, my cousin Julian, called out from across the vast expanse of our circular table, his voice laced with that perfectly calibrated mixture of pity and superiority he'd honed at Harvard Law. Still driving that old Volvo? I got a guy who does fantastic leases on Otis. You'd be surprised what you can afford. The table's attention flickered to me. I offered a small, placid smile. The Volvo runs fine, Julian. Gets me where I need to go. So practical. Aunt Beatrice chimed in, her eyes flicking from my simple tweed jacket to my cousin's bespoke suit. Though surely with that history thing you do, well, I imagine the budget is tight. I felt a familiar, gentle tightening in my chest, not of anger, but of a long-practiced patience. My history thing, as they called it, was my life's work. They pictured me in a dusty university office, poring over brittle maps for a meager salary. They had no framework for what I actually did, and I had long ago stopped trying to provide one. Speaking of careers, Uncle Robert beamed, raising his wine glass. Julian just made junior partner at Ropes and Gray, a magnificent achievement, following in his father's footsteps. A chorus of congratulations erupted. Julian preened, adjusting the cuff of his shirt to flash a Patek Philippe Calatrava. A beautiful watch, a classic choice for a new junior partner. A status symbol, clear and legible to everyone at the table. And you, Elias? My father's voice cut through the praise. It held the weight of 2 decades of disappointment. Arthur Hawthorne had once been a man of passion, a respected art dealer with a brilliant eye for 19th century American landscapes. Then the 2008 financial crisis had wiped him out, shattering his business and his spirit. He'd spent the subsequent years a changed man, pragmatic to a fault, championing safe, predictable career paths like law and finance, with the fervor of a convert. My chosen field was a constant, quiet affront to his new worldview. Still working for that preservation society? Before I could formulate a gentle, non-committal answer, the waiter arrived with a platter of seared scallops. As I reached for the lemon, my sleeve shifted. My father's eyes, trained by years of studying minute details in art, caught the movement. He froze. His wine glass, halfway to his lips, stopped. "What is it, Arthur?" my mother, Eleanor, asked, her brow furrowed with concern. My father didn't answer her. His gaze was fixed on my wrist. The object in question was not a watch. I've never cared for them. It was a simple, hand-tooled leather band, but attached to it was a small, intricately carved locket of oxidized silver. It was unassuming, almost plain, unless you knew what it was. And my father, of all people, knew. His fork clattered onto his plate. The sound was unnervingly loud in the sudden quiet. "That locket," he stammered, his face draining of color. "That can't be. It's impossible." The entire table fell silent, their conversations about stock options and summer homes in the Hamptons dying on their lips. They all turned to look at the small, dull piece of silver on my wrist. "Arthur, you're making a scene," my mother whispered, embarrassed. "Don't you see what that is?" His voice was a raw whisper, filled with a disbelief so profound it was almost painful. "That's Silas Croft's locket, the one he wore his entire life. It was supposed to have been lost with the rest of his estate." Julian squinted at it, his lawyerly mind trying to process this new, unexpected piece of evidence. "Silas Croft? The painter? I thought he was just some obscure landscape artist." "Obscure." My father's laugh was brittle, sharp with the old passion I hadn't heard in years. "He was a genius, a recluse. He only ever sold 3 paintings in his life. The rest, his entire life's work, his journals, his sketches, it all vanished after he died in 1910. The estate was sealed, lost to legal battles. Art historians have been searching for it for a century." He looked at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying understanding. "That locket, it's the key. It's the seal from his personal correspondence." "Where did you get it?" The silence that followed was exquisite. Aunt Beatrice's Hermes bag suddenly seemed like a cheap knockoff. Uncle Robert's talk of his new boat felt childish. "Oh, this old thing," I said, my voice quiet, deliberately echoing Beatrice's earlier feigned modesty about her handbag. "It was part of a recent acquisition." "Acquisition?" my mother sputtered. "What are you talking about?" "Elias, you consult for a nonprofit." I took a slow sip of water, allowing the moment to hang in the air, as thick and heavy as the velvet curtains framing the windows. "I haven't worked for the Boston Preservation Alliance in 7 years," I said calmly. "I left to start my own foundation. The Elysian Archive." "The Elysian Archive?" Julian's smirk had completely vanished, replaced by a look of intense, professional curiosity. "I've heard that name. A private digital humanities project. Very exclusive, very well-funded. They made headlines last year for digitizing the Vatican's secret archives. We have a file on them at the firm for our arts and antiquities clients. No one knows who's behind it. It's run by an anonymous director." I met his gaze across the table. Not entirely anonymous. The collective intake of breath was almost comical. My father was still staring at the locket, his mind clearly racing, connecting dots I had laid out so carefully over the years. But how?" Uncle Robert managed to ask, his voice thin. "A project of that scale, the technology, the legal access, it would take hundreds of millions of dollars. Our last funding round valued us at $9 billion. I corrected him gently. "Though, of course, valuations can be so volatile, can't they, Julian?" The magnificent watch on his wrist suddenly looked very small indeed. My father's head snapped up. His art dealer's mind had finally caught up with his shock. "The Croft estate," he said, his voice trembling. "There were rumors last month that a private buyer had finally located and acquired the entire collection. The art world has been buzzing about it. It was an anonymous purchase through a Swiss intermediary." He looked at me, his expression a maelstrom of confusion, regret, and a flicker of something I hadn't seen in a very long time. Pride. "That was you. You bought the Croft estate." I nodded slowly. "We did. The house, the land, and everything in it. Over 400 paintings, 12 volumes of journals, thousands of sketches." I paused, letting the weight of it settle. The world thought his work was lost. It wasn't lost. It was just waiting. The rest of the dinner passed in a state of suspended animation. The bravado and one-upmanship had evaporated, replaced by a stunned, awkward quiet. The lobster thermidor went largely untouched. My cousins, usually so eager to talk about their careers, seemed to have forgotten what they did for a living. "So, Uncle Charles finally broke the silence, his tone now unctuously respectful. "This foundation of yours, you're always looking for new patrons, I imagine? My financial advisor has been telling me to get more involved in philanthropy. Tax benefits, you know." I resisted the urge to smile. "I appreciate the offer, Uncle, but we're a private operating foundation, not a public charity. We're fully endowed." "Endowed?" Julian asked, his voice sharp with the precision of a lawyer who smelled money. "By whom?" I met his gaze again. By me, I pulled out my phone, a simple, functional model, not the latest iPhone that had earned me a few Snickers earlier, and tapped the screen, pulling up a public-facing page from our website. It showed a simple mission statement, and at the bottom, in small print, founded and endowed by Elias Thorne. I sold my first company, a data compression algorithm I developed in my 20s, to a rather large tech firm about 8 years ago. I've been using the proceeds to build the archive ever since. Julian's face went pale. He remembered. I had tried to explain it to him once, years ago, and he had laughed, telling me to get a real job. The Althean algorithm, he whispered, that was sold to Oracle for. God, the number had so many zeros I thought it was a typo in the Wall Street Journal. It was a fair price, I said, deliberately understating the 9-figure sum. Aunt Beatrice leaned forward, her earlier disdain replaced by a predatory gleam in her eye. But Elias, darling, why didn't you tell us? All this time, we thought you were struggling. She gestured vaguely at my jacket. We would have helped. I ran a thumb over the silver locket. I wasn't struggling, Aunt Beatrice. I was working, and sometimes the most important work is done quietly, without an audience. I looked at my father. Some things aren't for show. He was still lost in thought, his eyes distant. The locket, he said softly. I saw a drawing of it once, in a rare auction catalog from the 1920s. It was described as Croft's personal seal. He used it to lock a small, iron-bound chest where he kept his most private journals. I nodded. The chest was in the attic of his house, tucked under the eaves. It hadn't been opened in over 100 years. My mother touched my arm, her touch tentative. But son, why keep all of this a secret? All these years, you let us believe? Believe what? I asked, my voice still gentle but now edged with a fine, sharp point. That I was a failure because I didn't go into finance? That my life's work was a hobby because it didn't come with a corner office and a fancy title? I didn't keep a secret. I just stopped trying to explain it to people who weren't interested in listening. I looked around the table. I wanted to build something of substance, something that would last, not just chase the next bonus or a bigger house. My father's gaze met mine, and in his eyes, I saw the ghost of the man he used to be, the man who would spend hours explaining the brushstrokes of a Thomas Cole painting, the man who taught me that an object's true worth was in its story, its craftsmanship, its soul. His masterpiece, my father whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The last light on the sound. It was rumored to be in that collection. They say it's the greatest American landscape ever painted. Is it there, Elias? I gave him a small, genuine smile. It is, Dad, and it's more beautiful than anyone ever imagined. Just then, my phone buzzed with a quiet notification. A message from my team leader in Florence, where we were in the final stages of a project to digitally preserve every document in the Uffizi Gallery's archives. A project no one in this room could even conceive of. Julian tried to regain some footing, cleared his throat. Well, at Ropes and Gray, we have a significant arts law division. If the foundation ever requires outside counsel for acquisitions of this magnitude. I cut him off, my politeness unwavering. Thank you, Julian, but we have our own in-house counsel. A team of 12, based in Geneva. I'm sure you'd find their credentials adequate. He deflated completely, his junior partnership suddenly seeming like a participation trophy. Aunt Beatrice, ever the social strategist, tried a different tack. Elias, you simply must come to the yacht club benefit next month. There's a lovely young woman I want you to meet. Her father is the CEO of... I'm afraid I can't, I said. I'll be in the Hudson Valley, overseeing the restoration of the Croft estate. It's a delicate process. You're restoring the house yourself? Uncle Robert asked, incredulous. Of course, I replied. I'm a preservationist. It's what I do. After dinner, as the others gathered their expensive coats and valet tickets, my father followed me out into the crisp night air. The city lights glittered across the river, cold and distant. He struggled for words, his breath misting in front of him. The painting, he finally managed. The last light on the sound. It was the one I had a picture of on my desk for 20 years. I nodded. I remember. Right up until you had to sell your own collection to cover your losses. He winced at the memory, a shadow passing over his face. "Is that why you did this?" he asked quietly, his voice raw. "To prove me wrong? To show me what a fool I'd been?" I turned to face him, the faint sounds of the city a backdrop to the most important conversation of my life. "No," I said, and the truth of it felt as solid and real as the ground beneath my feet. "I did this because of you. Not the man who's been sitting at that dinner table for the last 15 years, but the man you were before that. The man who taught me to see. You taught me about Croft. You taught me about the importance of legacy, of beauty, of preserving things that matter. You told me his story was a tragedy, that the world had lost a great treasure." I paused, letting him hear the echo of his own words. I didn't want it to be a tragedy anymore. So I found it. His eyes shone with unshed tears. "All that time, I thought you were throwing your life away on a dream that couldn't pay the bills." "It was never about the bills," I said. I unclasped the locket from my wrist. The silver felt cool and heavy in my palm. It was about finishing the story. Just then, Julian and Uncle Robert burst out of the restaurant, already on their phones, no doubt calling their brokers to find out everything they could about the Elysian archive. Aunt Beatrice was not so subtly showing my mother pictures of her friend's daughter on her phone. "Here," I said, holding the locket out to my father. "This belongs with you. You're the one who understands its real worth." He stepped back, shaking his head, his hands held up as if to ward it off. "I can't, Elias. It's a piece of history. It belongs in a museum." "Actually," I said, a real smile finally reaching my eyes, "the entire Croft estate is going to become a museum. A small, private one dedicated to his work, run by the foundation." I closed his hand around the locket. "And I need a curator, someone with an expert eye, someone who knows the collection better than anyone alive." His hands shook as he stared at the object in his palm. He looked up at me, his face a canvas of disbelief and dawning hope. "A curator? I can't think of anyone better qualified," I said softly. My mother came over, her expression a mixture of pride and bewilderment. "Elias, dear, about this lovely girl Beatrice mentioned." "I'm sorry, Mom," I said, glancing at my phone. A message from my actual partner, the head of conservation at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, whom I'd met at a conference where I was the keynote speaker. "I'm already seeing someone. I think you'd like her. Her passion is restoring Vermeer." Various relatives within earshot performed a comical double-take. "You know," my father said, his voice soft, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings on the locket, "I always wondered why you were so stubborn, why you wouldn't just go into banking like Julian. Remember what you used to tell me about Croft?" I asked. "That he was a true artist, not because he was successful, but because he was relentless in his pursuit of a singular vision, regardless of what the world thought." He nodded, a slow, sad smile touching his lips. "That's what I built," I said. "Something with a singular vision. Something that lasts." My phone buzzed again. It was my car service. The simple sedan, not a fleet of black SUVs. "You should go," he said, his voice stronger now. "You have work to do." "Actually," I said, pulling two crisp, printed documents from my jacket pocket. They weren't tickets, but invitations. "Why don't you and Mom come up to the estate next weekend? See what your son actually built." As we said our goodbyes, I could hear Julian on the phone, explaining to someone why junior partnerships were really just a stepping stone to more meaningful work. Aunt Beatrice was suddenly asking my mother about the best way to invest in the digital humanities. But none of it mattered. What mattered was the look on my father's face as he showed my mother the locket, explaining its history with the same fire and passion I remembered from my childhood. Some things, I thought as my car pulled away from the curb, are worth more than money. Some things are worth more than being right. The greatest treasures are the ones we manage to recover from the wreckage of the past. Not just paintings or lockets, but dreams and passion and the quiet, unshakable truth of who we are. And sometimes the most successful thing a person can do is not to build an empire for the world to see, but to patiently, quietly restore a kingdom for one.